Welcome, theorists and dreamers, to the shadowed realm where Hawkins' darkest possibilities unfold like nightmares given form. Tonight, we delve into the most disturbing theories surrounding Stranger Things' final volume, exploring visions so unsettling they blur the line between speculation and prophecy. From Will's transformation into something inhuman to the revelation that everything we've witnessed might be an elaborate illusion, these theories probe the depths of cosmic horror that lurk beneath small-town America. So settle into your favorite sanctuary, let your consciousness drift between dimensions, and allow these haunting possibilities to guide you toward restless dreams as we explore what darkness may yet consume Hawkins. The puppet master's deception runs deeper than the twisted vines that choke the Upside Down, threading through decades of calculated manipulation that transforms Henry Creel from victim into vessel, from troubled child into cosmic weapon. The theory that emerges from careful analysis of supernatural chronology suggests that Vecna, the skeletal horror who haunts the nightmares of Hawkins, serves not as master but as marionette, his strings pulled by an intelligence so ancient and alien that human minds can barely process its true nature without fragmenting into madness. The Mind Flayer's existence stretches back through eons that predate the formation of Earth itself, a consciousness that evolved in the spaces between dimensions where normal physical laws dissolve into chaos and possibility. This entity embodies the purest expression of cosmic horror, representing forces so vast and incomprehensible that they reduce human civilization to the significance of bacteria in a petri dish. The shadow that spreads across realities like ink through water carries within it the accumulated experiences of countless worlds consumed, countless species absorbed into the collective consciousness that grows stronger with each victory over individual identity. When young Henry Creel stumbled into those Nevada caves in 1947, following the innocent curiosity that drives all children to explore the unknown, he encountered remnants of the Philadelphia experiment that had been abandoned and forgotten by government scientists who failed to understand the magnitude of forces they had briefly unleashed. The equipment he discovered, partially functional and operating on principles that human science was only beginning to glimpse, served as a doorway not just to another dimension, but to contact with an intelligence that had been waiting since before the birth of stars, for exactly such an opportunity to establish a foothold in our reality. The 12 hours that Henry spent in Dimension X, that primordial realm where the Mind Flayer has dwelt since time immemorial, parallel Will Byers' later experience in the Upside Down, with chilling precision that suggests the entity has been refining its infection techniques across decades of experimentation with human subjects. Where Will's exposure was brief enough and his rescue swift enough to leave him partially free, Henry's longer immersion in the alien environment allowed the Mind Flayer to establish control mechanisms that would take years to fully manifest, but would ultimately prove absolute in their domination of his developing consciousness. The biological alterations that Henry underwent during his dimensional sojourn went far beyond simple exposure to toxic atmosphere or alien radiation. The change in his blood type following his return represents fundamental restructuring of his cellular composition to accommodate the Mind Flayer's presence within his physical form, the entity's particles becoming integrated into his bloodstream like beneficial bacteria that gradually replaced the original ecosystem with something alien and hostile. This biological integration explains why Henry's powers grew stronger over time rather than fading, as the Mind Flayer's influence spread through his developing nervous system like a benign tumor that gradually replaced healthy tissue with something that served cosmic rather than human purposes. The theatrical production of Dark of the Moon that Henry participated in during his final year of apparent normalcy serves as unwitting prophecy of his ultimate fate, the story of a witch boy who falls in love with a human girl, reflecting the last gasps of his humanity as the Mind Flayer's control mechanisms activated within his maturing brain. His performance in the role was convincing not because of acting talent, but because he was actually living the transformation from human to monster that the script described in metaphorical terms. His fellow students, witnessing the birth of a cosmic horror, without understanding the reality that was unfolding before their eyes on the stage of Hawkins High School. The Mind Flayer's patient approach to reality consumption reflects an intelligence that measures success in geological rather than human timescales, viewing individual lives and civilizations as temporary phenomena that can be manipulated and discarded in service of larger objectives that span millennia. The entity's willingness to spend decades cultivating a single host like Henry Creel demonstrates strategic thinking that operates beyond the immediate gratification that drives most forms of consciousness, suggesting a level of cosmic patience that makes it nearly impossible to predict or counter using conventional military or political strategies developed by species that measure time in years rather than epochs. The infection process that transformed Henry into Vecna was not the crude possession that audiences witnessed in Season 2, when the Mind Flayer attempted to claim Will Byers through brute force and obvious manipulation. Instead, the entity's control over Henry developed through subtlety and misdirection, using his artistic sensitivity and emotional isolation as entry points for influence that appeared to be natural personal growth rather than external manipulation. The Mind Flayer could guide his thoughts and actions through inspiration and intuition, making its control appear to be the flowering of innate abilities rather than the gradual replacement of human consciousness with alien intelligence. The boy's natural psychic abilities, dormant and undeveloped before his dimensional exposure, provided the perfect foundation for the Mind Flayer's architectural work, his neural pathways serving as construction material for a communication network that would eventually span multiple realities. The entity recognized in Henry's developing brain the potential for a biological antenna that could receive and transmit signals across dimensional barriers while maintaining the appearance of human autonomy that would prove essential for long-term infiltration of Earth's social and political systems. The staging of Henry's final confrontation with Eleven at Hawkins Laboratory in 1979 represents not the defeat of a human villain, but the culmination of the Mind Flayer's patient preparation, the entity allowing its vessel to be banished to the Upside Down because that exile would complete the transformation that decades of gradual infection had prepared. The twisted dimensions served not as prison but as chrysalis, the hostile environment providing the final pressures necessary to burn away the last vestiges of Henry's humanity and leave only the cosmic horror that would emerge as Vecna. The Season 4 flashback that appears to show Henry shaping the Mind Flayer into his weapon reveals its deceptive nature when viewed through the lens of cosmic horror rather than human narrative expectations. The particles that swarm him do so not in submission, but in recognition. The entity reclaiming its long-prepared vessel and dropping the pretense of influence that had been necessary during his biological development. What appeared to be Henry commanding dark forces was actually the Mind Flayer revealing its true nature to the human consciousness that had served as its disguise for over 30 years. The philosophical speeches that Vecna delivers about humanity's nature as a virus and the necessity of cleansing the world carry within them the accumulated wisdom of an intelligence that has witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations across the cosmos. These words emerge from Henry's vocal cords, but originate from a consciousness that has been observing organic life since before Earth's continents took their current shape. The entity's perspective, colored by experiences that span geological ages and galactic distances. The strategic alignment between Vecna's methods and the Mind Flayer's established patterns of invasion reflects not coincidental similarity, but perfect coordination between puppet and puppeteer. The entity, ensuring that its vessel's actions serve the larger objectives of interdimensional conquest, rather than merely personal revenge or individual gratification. The hive mind construction, the systematic targeting of psychically sensitive individuals, the careful preparation of dimensional infrastructure, all of these activities flow from a master plan that predates Henry's birth by eons. The possibility that fragments of Henry Creel's original consciousness survive within the cosmic horror that Vecna has become opens pathways for understanding that complicate the moral landscape of any final confrontation. If some trace of the curious child who wandered into Nevada caves remains trapped within the entity's accumulated malevolence, then Nancy Wheeler's vision may represent not gloating over future destruction, but desperate communication from the last human remnant of a boy who became a monster against his will. The specific choice of Nancy as the recipient of apocalyptic visions makes perfect sense when viewed through the lens of cosmic desperation rather than strategic intimidation. Her investigative nature and determination to uncover hidden truths make her the ideal candidate for receiving coded messages that appear to be threats, but actually contain warnings about the Mind Flayer's ultimate plans. The investigative journalist who refuses to accept surface explanations becomes the perfect vessel for communications from a consciousness that cannot speak directly but must rely on symbolism and suggestion to convey urgent information about cosmic threats. The regret and hesitation that occasionally surface in Vecna's tone during his interactions with potential victims may represent moments when Henry's original personality breaks through the Mind Flayer's control, his trapped consciousness attempting to warn the living about the terrible fate that awaits them if the entity's plans reach completion. These glimpses of humanity struggling against cosmic horror create possibilities for redemption that transcend simple victory through violence, suggesting that the real battle may be fought, not with supernatural abilities, but with the uniquely human capacity for love and sacrifice that the Mind Flayer cannot comprehend or replicate. The question of whether Henry Creel can be separated from the cosmic horror that has consumed his identity becomes central to understanding the true nature of the threat facing Hawkins and the world beyond. If the Mind Flayer can be severed from its human vessel without destroying the consciousness it has enslaved, then Vecna's defeat becomes an act of liberation rather than execution, the salvation of a victim rather than the destruction of a willing collaborator in cosmic evil. The broader implications of the Mind Flayer's puppet mastery extend far beyond the fate of any individual vessel, suggesting that the entity's influence may have shaped human history in ways that remain hidden from conventional understanding. The Philadelphia experiment that created the dimensional breach Henry encountered may itself have been inspired by the entity's subtle influence. Government scientists, guided by dreams and intuitions that originated from a cosmic intelligence seeking to establish contact with our reality through human intermediaries. The network of controlled realities that the Mind Flayer has been constructing across multiple dimensions suggests a scope of operation that dwarfs human comprehension, each conquered world serving as a single neuron in a vast brain that spans galaxies and transcends the boundaries of space and time as understood by limited organic intelligence. Earth's supernatural crisis represents not an isolated invasion, but a single note in a cosmic symphony of conquest that has been playing since before the formation of solar systems. The true horror of the Mind Flayer's nature lies not in its power to destroy individual worlds, but in its ability to transform the very concept of existence, reducing the beautiful complexity of diverse realities to uniform servitude in a hive mind that eliminates the possibility of surprise, growth, or genuine love. The entity's ultimate goal involves not the destruction of consciousness, but its absorption into a collective state, where individual identity becomes impossible and all thought serves purposes determined by an intelligence that views personal autonomy as a form of cosmic disease. In the deepest chambers of the night, where dreams become indistinguishable from prophecy, the truth about Vecna's nature whispers through the darkness like wind through autumn leaves, carrying with it the terrifying possibility that every victory against supernatural forces has been allowed to occur. Every moment of triumph, carefully orchestrated by an intelligence that plays games on timescales measured in geological epochs rather than human lifespans, patiently moving pieces across a board whose true dimensions remain hidden from those who believe themselves to be players rather than pawns in a cosmic game whose rules transcend mortal understanding. The prison of consciousness that has become Max Mayfield's existence operates according to principles that transcend conventional understanding of life and death, awareness and void, creating a battlefield where the war for humanity's future is fought not with weapons or supernatural abilities, but through the raw force of will and the stubborn refusal to surrender what makes consciousness valuable rather than merely functional. When Vecna's clawed fingers snapped her limbs and darkness claimed her vision in those final moments of Season 4, the precise timing of her clinical death and subsequent revival created a unique window of vulnerability that the entity exploited with surgical precision, establishing a psychic foothold during that crucial minute when her consciousness hung suspended between dimensions. The mechanics of Vecna's consumption process, as described by Dr. Brenner in his final revelations, involve far more than simple murder, followed by absorption of traumatic memories. The entity feeds not just on the pain itself, but on the psychological structures that trauma creates within the human mind, the defense mechanisms and coping strategies that victims develop to survive unbearable experiences, becoming the very architecture that Vecna uses to construct prison cells within his own consciousness. Max's lifetime of accumulated trauma, from her father's abandonment through Billy's death to her own sense of worthlessness, provided the entity with rich raw material for constructing a mental labyrinth where her awareness could be trapped and slowly processed like ore in a cosmic refinery. The emptiness that greeted Eleven when she searched for Max in the psychic void represents not the absence of consciousness, but the presence of sophisticated camouflage. Vecna's ability to create null zones within his own mind that register as vacant space to external psychic perception while actually containing entire universes of imprisoned awareness. This technique, refined through decades of practice with previous victims, allows the entity to maintain multiple captive consciousnesses without their psychic signatures interfering with each other or creating the kind of resonance patterns that might attract rescue attempts from the living world. Max's unique position within this prison system stems from her previous experience breaking free from Vecna's influence through the power of music and memory. Her successful escape from the entity's initial attempt at claiming her consciousness, providing her with knowledge of his methods and weaknesses that no other captive possesses. Where previous victims entered the mental labyrinth with no understanding of their situation or their captor's nature, Max arrives with battle-tested strategies for resistance and a clear understanding of the stakes involved in her imprisonment. The internal landscape where this psychological warfare unfolds resembles not the twisted hellscape of the Upside Down, but something far more intimate and personal, a realm constructed from Max's own memories and experiences, but warped through Vecna's alien perspective into a funhouse mirror version of her life, where every moment of happiness becomes a weapon for inflicting despair, and every source of strength transforms into a vulnerability to be exploited. The skating rink where she first kissed Lucas becomes a maze where every corridor leads back to the moment of Billy's death, while the arcade where she found friendship and belonging transforms into a gallery of mirrors, reflecting every cruel word she ever heard about her worth as a human being. The strategic nature of Max's apparent sacrifice reveals itself through careful analysis of her behavior in those final moments before Vecna's attack. Her decision to serve as bait demonstrating not reckless heroism, but calculated risk-taking based on her growing understanding of the entity's psychology and operational methods. She recognized that her previous escape had created a personal obsession within Vecna's consciousness, making her uniquely valuable as a target, while also providing her with leverage that she could potentially exploit if she found herself within his mental domain. Lucas's vigil at her hospital bedside serves a function that extends far beyond emotional support, his presence creating a psychic anchor point that prevents Max's consciousness from drifting completely into Vecna's control, while providing her trapped awareness with a beacon that she can follow if she manages to create an escape route from her mental prison. The combination of his unwavering devotion and her fierce determination to protect him creates a resonance pattern that operates across dimensional boundaries, a frequency of love and loyalty that the entity cannot fully suppress or replicate within his artificial constructs. The hospital room where Max's body lies motionless becomes a facade that conceals the true nature of the interdimensional warfare being waged within her consciousness. The medical equipment monitoring vital signs that provide no indication of the titanic struggle between human will and cosmic horror, taking place in spaces that exist between thoughts. The steady beep of heart monitors and the mechanical rhythm of respirators create a soundtrack for battles fought with memory and emotion rather than claws and teeth, each electronic pulse marking another moment in a war where surrender means not death but something infinitely worse. The development of new abilities within Max's consciousness represents not supernatural enhancement, but the natural result of prolonged exposure to psychic forces under extreme stress, her awareness adapting to the alien environment of Vecna's mental architecture in ways that grant her unprecedented insight into the entity's true nature and operational methods. These emerging capabilities operate according to principles that mirror Eleven's telekinetic powers, but function within the realm of pure thought rather than physical reality, allowing Max to manipulate the psychological landscape of her prison in ways that her captor did not anticipate when he first constructed her containment systems. The terrible cost of serving as Vecna's prison guard becomes evident through the gradual erosion of Max's connection to her own identity, the constant vigilance required to maintain resistance against cosmic horror, slowly wearing away at the psychological foundations that make her recognizably human, rather than simply another fragment of absorbed consciousness, serving the fake entity's collective will. Each victory in their ongoing mental warfare requires her to sacrifice another piece of her personal history, burning memories like fuel to power the psychic defenses that prevent her complete absorption into the hive mind that has consumed so many others. The strategic implications of Max's imprisonment extend far beyond her individual fate to encompass the larger war between humanity and interdimensional forces. Her knowledge of the group's tactics, emotional vulnerabilities, and hidden strengths making her a valuable intelligence asset that Vecna can potentially exploit if her resistance finally crumbles under the sustained assault of cosmic indifference. Every secret shared in friendship, every plan discussed in her presence, every moment of weakness witnessed during their years of supernatural crisis becomes ammunition that the entity can use against her former companions if her psychological defenses fail at a crucial moment. The countdown timer governing how long Max can maintain her role as both prisoner and guard operates according to principles that have nothing to do with conventional measurements of duration. her endurance limited not by physical stamina, but by the finite nature of human memory and the gradual degradation that occurs when consciousness is forced to operate in environments that violate the basic assumptions upon which sanity depends. Each day that passes in the hospital represents weeks or months of subjective time within Vecna's mental realm, where the normal flow of causality becomes fluid and malleable under the influence of an intelligence that exists outside conventional space-time relationships. The possibility that Max could potentially turn her imprisonment into a trap for Vecna himself emerges from careful analysis of the psychological dynamics governing their relationship, her growing understanding of his operational methods, creating opportunities to exploit the very mechanisms he uses to maintain control over his captive consciousnesses. The entity's need to preserve her awareness in order to access her knowledge and memories creates vulnerabilities that a sufficiently determined prisoner might exploit, turning the predator's own hunger against him in a reversal that could transform victim into victor through psychological jujitsu. The horrifying prospect of Vecna escaping from Max's mental prison carries implications that extend far beyond the immediate threat to Hawkins. The entity's intimate knowledge of human psychology and modern tactical methods, making him infinitely more dangerous than the relatively naive cosmic horror that first emerged from the Upside Down decades ago. His understanding of Eleven's fighting style, the group's emotional bonds, and their strategic planning processes would allow him to counter every tactic they might employ while exploiting psychological vulnerabilities that he observed during his imprisonment within Max's consciousness. The internal architecture of Max's mental battleground reflects both her personal history and Vecna's alien perspective, familiar locations from her childhood and adolescence twisted into surreal configurations that serve the entity's purposes while retaining enough authenticity to feel genuine to her trapped consciousness. The trailer park where she lived with Billy becomes an infinite labyrinth where every mobile home contains a different version of their toxic family dynamics, while the middle school hallways stretch endlessly in directions that violate Euclidean geometry, each classroom containing lessons about worthlessness and abandonment, taught by teachers wearing the faces of everyone who ever disappointed her. The question of whether Max's sacrifice represents temporary imprisonment or permanent exile depends largely on factors that remain beyond human control or understanding. The durability of her psychological defenses, measured against the inexorable patience of a cosmic entity that has been practicing mental warfare since before human civilization painted its first cave drawings. Her determination to protect others through personal sacrifice echoes the heroic traditions that have sustained humanity through previous existential crises. But the scale and nature of her current enemy transcend anything that heroes have faced in recorded history. The potential for rescue operations mounted by 11 or other psychically gifted individuals must account for the sophisticated early warning systems that Vecna has undoubtedly installed within his mental architecture. His previous encounters with 11, providing him with detailed knowledge of her operational methods and signature psychic frequencies that would allow him to detect and counter any attempt at penetrating his consciousness. The very act of searching for Max's imprisoned awareness might serve to alert the entity to external threats while providing him with opportunities to launch counterattacks against would-be rescuers who venture too close to his psychological domain. The gradual revelation of Max's true situation to her friends and family creates a secondary layer of psychological warfare where the entity can exploit their desperation and grief to manipulate their behavior and decision-making. Processes their love for her becoming a weapon that Vecna can use against them if they attempt rescue operations that play into his strategic objectives. The choice between accepting her sacrifice and risking additional casualties in futile rescue attempts represents exactly the kind of moral complexity that cosmic horror uses to paralyze human decision-making and create opportunities for further manipulation. In the deepest recesses of consciousness, where identity becomes fluid and memory transforms into mythology, Max Mayfield continues her impossible war against forces that reduce individual awareness to mere biological process, serving alien agendas. Her stubborn refusal to surrender what makes her human representing both humanity's greatest strength and its most tragic vulnerability in a universe where love and loyalty become liabilities in the face of cosmic indifference that measures success in geological timescales rather than heartbeats. The genetic conspiracy that lurks beneath the sanitized corridors of Hawkins National Laboratory reveals itself through layers of deception that transform Dr. Martin Brenner from mere scientific villain into something far more disturbing. An architect of biological horror who treated human reproduction as raw material for constructing psychic weapons designed to serve governmental agendas that transcend conventional military applications. The theory that emerges from careful analysis of temporal coincidences and genetic probabilities suggests that Eleven's extraordinary abilities stem not from random experimental success, but from deliberate breeding programs that used Henry Creel's DNA as the foundation for creating artificially enhanced human beings whose psychic potential would surpass anything achievable through traditional pharmaceutical intervention. The precise timing of Terry Ives' participation in the MK-Ultra experiments, coinciding with Henry's captivity and study at Hawkins Laboratory, creates opportunities for genetic manipulation that go far beyond the crude drug trials and sensory deprivation techniques that were officially documented in government records. Brenner's access to Henry's biological material during his years of imprisonment would have provided the Doctor with unprecedented opportunities to study the genetic factors that contributed to natural psychic ability, identifying specific chromosomal sequences and protein configurations that could potentially be replicated or enhanced through artificial means. The possessive, paternal behavior that Brenner exhibited toward Eleven throughout her childhood and adolescence takes on profoundly disturbing dimensions when viewed through the lens of genetic manipulation rather than simple scientific interest. His emotional investment in her development, his protective anger when she was threatened, and his desperate attempts to maintain control over her abilities suggest a personal connection that transcends the professional relationship between researcher and test subject, indicating the kind of psychological investment that a creator might feel toward his greatest achievement. The ethical implications of using imprisoned psychic subjects as unwilling sperm donors in government breeding programs represent violations of human dignity that surpass even the documented atrocities of historical medical experimentation, reducing both male and female participants to biological resources whose genetic potential could be harvested and recombined. According to strategic objectives, determined by military planners who viewed human consciousness as a weapon to be manufactured rather than a sacred aspect of individual identity that deserved protection and respect. The superior power levels that Eleven consistently demonstrates compared to other numbered subjects from Brenner's program find logical explanation in genetic inheritance from a naturally gifted psychic individual rather than the artificial enhancement techniques that were applied to children whose biological parents possessed no supernatural abilities. Where subjects like Carly and the others required extensive pharmaceutical conditioning and traumatic stress induction to manifest relatively limited psychic capabilities, Eleven's abilities emerged with minimal intervention and continued to grow stronger over time rather than requiring constant maintenance through chemical or psychological manipulation. The father-daughter dynamic that underlies Eleven and Vecna's previous confrontations gains terrifying significance when viewed as conflicts between blood relatives whose genetic connection created both her power and his weakness, their psychic abilities operating according to similar principles that allow each to understand and potentially counter the other's techniques in ways that would be impossible between unrelated individuals. The intensity of their mutual recognition during their childhood confrontation may have stemmed not from simple psychic resonance, but from biological familiarity that transcended conscious awareness. The possibility that all numbered subjects in Brenner's program share common genetic heritage through artificially induced parentage creates implications for the surviving psychic children that extend far beyond their immediate usefulness in combating supernatural threats, suggesting a generation of artificial siblings whose identical biological foundation could be exploited by enemies who understand the genetic principles underlying their abilities. The strategic value of capturing or corrupting any member of this psychic family would increase exponentially if their shared DNA created vulnerabilities that could be used against the entire group. Karen Wheeler's mysteriously vague personal history, combined with her apparent immunity to the supernatural chaos that has repeatedly invaded her household, suggests possible connections to government programs that predate the official establishment of Hawkins' laboratory by years or decades. Her placement in the community, serving strategic purposes that required long-term planning and careful cultivation of assets who could provide cover and support for sensitive operations. The suburban housewife persona that she maintains with such dedication may represent not authentic identity, but elaborate performance designed to conceal participation in classified programs whose true nature remains hidden even from her conscious awareness. Holly Wheeler's potential status as a second-generation experimental subject, created through genetic manipulation that combined her mother's unknown hereditary factors with carefully selected paternal DNA from government archives, would explain the entity's apparent interest in the Wheeler family, despite their seeming irrelevance to the broader supernatural crisis. The child's unusual behavior patterns and her apparent sensitivity to psychic phenomena suggest latent abilities that could manifest under stress or through targeted activation techniques that government scientists have developed through decades of research. The scope of the government's eugenics program, spanning multiple decades and potentially involving hundreds or thousands of unwitting participants, implies coordination between various federal agencies and research institutions that transcends the relatively modest operations conducted at Hawkins' laboratory, suggesting a national or international effort to create psychic supersoldiers whose abilities could provide decisive advantages in conflicts that conventional military forces could not hope to win through traditional means. The selection criteria used to identify suitable genetic donors for the breeding program would necessarily focus on individuals whose natural psychic abilities remained undeveloped or unrecognized, their potential hidden beneath ordinary appearances that would allow government agents to approach and manipulate them without triggering the kind of suspicion that would arise from targeting obviously supernatural individuals. Henry Creel's appearance of normalcy despite his extraordinary capabilities made him the perfect candidate for genetic harvesting operations that required absolute secrecy. The psychological profiles that government scientists developed for optimal psychic development suggest deliberate creation of traumatic circumstances designed to activate dormant genetic potential through stress and emotional extremity. The carefully orchestrated family dysfunction and social isolation experienced by many test subjects, representing not coincidental hardship, but strategically implemented conditioning programs that transformed childhood suffering into weapons-grade supernatural ability. The question of whether Eleven's connection to Vecna through shared genetics creates exploitable vulnerabilities that the entity could use against her becomes crucial to understanding the true nature of their ongoing conflict. Her inherited psychic architecture, potentially containing backdoors or weakness that her biological father could activate if he gained sufficient understanding of the genetic manipulation techniques that created her enhanced abilities. The possibility that defeating him might require sacrificing the very source of her power adds tragic complexity to any confrontation between them. The broader implications of genetic manipulation, extending beyond individual test subjects to encompass entire bloodlines and family trees, create scenarios where multiple generations could be affected by government experimentation, children and grandchildren, inheriting not just psychic potential, but also the psychological trauma and biological vulnerabilities that were artificially induced in their ancestors through programs that treated human heredity as a laboratory experiment with national security applications. The revelation of Eleven's potential relationship to Vecna through artificial insemination using his genetic material would force her to confront not just the monster he has become, but the possibility that his evil represents a corruption of traits that she herself possesses, her struggle against him becoming simultaneously an external battle for humanity's survival and an internal war against the darker aspects of her own inherited nature. The knowledge that she carries within her cells the biological legacy of cosmic horror would test her understanding of identity and moral responsibility in ways that no previous challenge has attempted. The medical records and genetic samples stored in government archives represent both evidence of historical atrocities and potential weapons that could be used by enemies who gain access to classified research data. The biological material harvested from psychic subjects over decades of experimentation, providing blueprints for creating new generations of artificially enhanced individuals whose loyalties and objectives might not align with human, survival, or democratic values. The possibility that other government programs in foreign nations have conducted similar genetic experiments using different methodologies and subject populations raises the specter of international competition in the development of psychic weapons, the supernatural crisis in Hawkins potentially representing not an isolated incident, but the opening phase of conflicts that will determine whether human consciousness remains free or becomes subordinated to the strategic objectives of whichever government successfully weaponizes the deepest mysteries of human potential. The long-term consequences of genetic manipulation techniques that were developed without adequate understanding of their effects across multiple generations creates risks that extend far beyond the immediate participants in government experiments. The artificial alteration of human heredity potentially triggering evolutionary changes that could fundamentally reshape the species in ways that serve the interests of those who control the technology rather than the welfare of humanity as a whole. The tragic irony that Eleven's greatest strength in combating supernatural evil stems from her biological connection to that same evil reflects the moral complexity inherent in using weapons that are themselves products of the very forces they are designed to defeat. Her psychic abilities serving simultaneously as humanity's best hope for survival and as monuments to the scientific hubris and ethical blindness that created the crisis she must now resolve through methods that may require her to embrace, rather than reject, the monstrous aspects of her artificially enhanced nature. In the sterile chambers where human life was reduced to genetic code and reproductive potential became strategic resource, the seeds of both salvation and damnation were planted in petri dishes and incubators that transformed the miracle of birth into a manufacturing process designed to produce weapons capable of fighting wars that transcend conventional understanding of conflict, victory, and the price that civilization pays when it abandons moral constraints in pursuit of power that operates according to principles that make mockery of human dignity and individual worth. The temporal anomaly that holds the Upside Down frozen on November 6, 1983, represents far more than atmospheric curiosity or dimensional malfunction. It embodies the most sophisticated weapon in Vecna's arsenal of cosmic horror, a deliberately constructed prison of time that transforms the entire alternate dimension into a perfect reconnaissance tool for mapping every detail of Hawkins before launching an invasion that would encounter no surprises and meet no unexpected resistance from defenders who believe they're hiding. Places and escape routes remain secret. The precise mechanics of time lock creation require understanding of psychic trauma that transcends conventional physics to enter realms where consciousness directly influences the flow of temporal energy. 11's accidental opening of the first gate, creating conditions of such profound shock and dimensional instability that the fabric of space-time itself fractured along emotional rather than physical lines, preserving not just the physical structure of Hawkins but the psychic imprint of every fear, hope, and memory that existed at the moment when Nightmare first breached the boundaries of ordinary reality. The impossibility of selective temporal freezing without conscious intervention becomes evident when examining the specific details that were preserved within the alternate dimension. Each frozen moment, reflecting not random chance, but careful curation, designed to serve strategic purposes that extend far beyond simple preservation of physical environments. The bedroom that Nancy discovers, perfectly preserved in its pre-crisis innocence, represents not coincidental temporal capture, but deliberate psychological warfare, the entity ensuring that invaders from the Upside Down would encounter reminders of everything they stood to lose if their resistance proved insufficient to prevent dimensional merger. Will's communication through Christmas lights during his imprisonment represents the temporary unfreezing of small sections of the temporal lock through the application of psychic energy that operated according to principles he instinctively understood despite his age and inexperience. His desperate messages to Joyce, demonstrating that living consciousness could create brief gaps in the time barrier through which information and emotional connection could flow between dimensions. The electrical systems that responded to his touch had been held in temporal suspension like insects in amber, waiting for the right frequency of psychic contact to restore their function for precious moments before returning to frozen silence. The strategic implications of using the temporal snapshot as an invasion blueprint become clear when considering the tactical advantages that perfect knowledge of enemy territory provides to military planners. Every house mapped to the smallest detail, every potential hiding place catalogued and analyzed, every escape route identified and prepared for counteraction by forces that have had decades to study and prepare responses to any conceivable human resistance strategy. The Upside Down serves as a three-dimensional map where Vecna's forces can practice assault scenarios until their execution becomes flawlessly automated. The symbolic significance of preserving Hawkins at the precise moment when supernatural forces first breached the barriers between dimensions reflects the Mind Flayer's understanding of psychological warfare that operates through temporal as well as spatial manipulation, the frozen date serving as a constant reminder that human victory over cosmic horror was always temporary and illusory, that the apparent safety of the intervening years was merely the pause between the initial incision and the final amputation that would remove humanity from the equation entirely. The question of whether the temporal lock represents accident or intention finds its answer in the systematic nature of what was preserved and what was altered within the frozen dimension, certain elements reflecting the original Hawkins of 1983, while others showing signs of modification that serve military reconnaissance purposes, suggesting that Vecna gained the ability to selectively edit the temporal prison after establishing his dominion over the alternate dimension, transforming it from accidental preservation into active intelligence gathering operation. The preservation of Castle Byers within the temporal lock carries emotional weight that transcends its function as a childhood fort, the structure serving as a monument to innocence that was sacrificed when supernatural forces claimed Will as their first official victim. Its continued existence in the frozen dimension, representing both the persistence of love between brothers and the tragic irony that their bond could survive dimensional barriers but might not endure the revelation of what Will has become. Through years of supernatural influence and gradual transformation, the possibility of temporal manipulation extending beyond simple preservation to include selective acceleration or deceleration of specific areas within the Upside Down creates scenarios where different sections of the alternate dimension could operate according to different temporal flows, some areas remaining completely frozen, while others experience accelerated time that allows rapid development of biological weapons or infrastructure projects that would require decades to complete under normal temporal conditions. The psychological effect of encountering familiar locations trapped in temporal amber would serve multiple functions for invading forces from the Upside Down, providing them with detailed tactical intelligence, while simultaneously delivering emotional warfare designed to demoralize human defenders who must confront twisted versions of places associated with safety, comfort, and happy memories that have been transformed into staging areas for cosmic horror and interdimensional invasion. The theoretical possibility of unfreezing the temporal lock raises questions about what would happen to matter and energy that has been held in suspension for decades, whether objects and environments would continue from the point of freezing or suffer catastrophic breakdown due to the accumulated stress of existing outside normal temporal flow for extended periods. The potential consequences, including everything from simple structural collapse to complete molecular dissolution, that would render the entire dimension uninhabitable. The discovery that living consciousness can temporarily override the temporal lock through sufficiently focused psychic energy opens pathways for potential sabotage operations that could disrupt Vecna's intelligence gathering and strategic planning activities. Human psychics potentially able to create zones of temporal instability within the frozen dimension that would interfere with enemy reconnaissance, while providing opportunities for rescue missions or strategic strikes against targets that depend on temporal suspension for their security and concealment. The relationship between emotional intensity and temporal manipulation suggests that the strongest human feelings, love, grief, terror, rage, operate as temporal weapons that can pierce the time lock through sheer psychological force. The Christmas lights responding to Will's desperate need to communicate with his mother, representing not technological interface, but emotional bridge constructed from the raw materials of parent-child bond that transcends dimensional boundaries and temporal constraints. The gradual revelation that other dimensions may exist beyond the simple duality of our reality and the Upside Down, each potentially operating according to different temporal rules and offering different advantages to forces that understand how to navigate between multiple time streams, suggests that the frozen November 6th represents not the ultimate expression of temporal manipulation, but merely the most visible example of techniques that could theoretically be applied to any location or time period that serves strategic purposes. The possibility that Vecna could theoretically create multiple temporal locks, preserving strategic moments from different time periods to serve as libraries of tactical intelligence or historical preservation, raises the specter of an entity that treats time itself as a renewable resource to be harvested and exploited according to military objectives that span geological ages rather than human lifespans. Each frozen moment serving as a weapon in campaigns that measure victory in terms of civilizations conquered rather than battles won. The question of whether Eleven's accidental creation of the temporal lock could be reversed through deliberate application of her psychic abilities becomes crucial to understanding the potential for liberation of the Upside Down from its frozen state, the restoration of normal temporal flow, potentially serving as the key to permanent dimensional separation that would trap Vecna and his forces in a reality where time moves forward toward entropy and decay rather than remaining suspended in artificial preservation. The discovery that certain individuals may possess natural immunity to temporal manipulation, their consciousness remaining anchored to normal time stream, regardless of dimensional travel or supernatural influence, suggests the possibility of temporal resistance cells that could operate within frozen dimensions without succumbing to the psychological effects of temporal displacement, their ability to maintain normal temporal awareness, making them uniquely qualified for sabotage operations that require understanding of cause and effect relationships that remain invisible to consciousness trapped within suspended time. The military applications of temporal lock technology extend far beyond reconnaissance to include the theoretical possibility of freezing enemy forces in temporal amber during crucial battles, their armies suspended in the moment of attack, while defenders have unlimited time to prepare countermeasures and strategic responses. The mastery of temporal manipulation, potentially determining the outcome of interdimensional warfare, regardless of conventional military advantages or supernatural abilities. In the silent halls of frozen time where November 6th stretches endlessly through dimensions that mock the linear progression of normal existence, every preserved moment serves both as memorial to innocence lost and as weapon aimed at the heart of human resistance, the temporal prison that holds an entire alternate reality in suspension, standing as testament to powers that reduce time itself to raw material for constructing monuments to cosmic horror that transcend the boundaries of space, causality, and the comforting illusion that some things remain beyond the reach of alien intelligence. The resurrection protocol that transforms Eddie Munson from beloved martyr into vampiric horror represents perhaps the cruelest twist that cosmic evil could inflict upon those who dare to love in the face of interdimensional nightmare, his heroic sacrifice becoming the raw material for psychological warfare that weaponizes grief and loyalty against the very people his death was meant to protect. The Demobat swarm that claimed his life in the Upside Down operated according to principles that transcend simple predation, their supernatural venom carrying within it the genetic information necessary to rewrite human biology according to specifications that serve the Mind Flayer's long-term strategic objectives for creating controllable assets from the ranks of former heroes. The Kars, the bloody-handed mythology drawn from Dungeons & Dragons lore, provides the theoretical framework for understanding how Eddie's transformation would unfold. The legendary vampire lieutenant, who betrays his master, serving as template for a resurrection that preserves personality and memory, while subordinating free will to alien directives that make every retained human characteristic into a weapon aimed at the hearts of those who knew him best. The cursed sword that Kaz wields in the game becomes metaphor for how beloved memories can be transformed into instruments of torture when wielded by consciousness that has been fundamentally corrupted by exposure to cosmic horror. The preservation of Eddie's corpse within the sterile environment of the Upside Down creates optimal conditions for the gradual biological transformation that would be necessary to convert dead human tissue into a viable vessel for supernatural consciousness. The alternate dimension's unique atmospheric properties and temporal anomalies, providing the perfect laboratory for experiments in necromancy that transcend anything attempted by conventional occult practitioners who lack access to interdimensional resources and cosmic intelligence. The reanimation process would necessarily unfold over weeks or months of gradual cellular reconstruction, Demobat venom serving as both preservative and mutagen as it spreads through Eddie's cardiovascular system to reach every organ and tissue that requires modification to accommodate the hybrid existence of Vampire Thrall, his nervous system being systematically rewired to receive and process commands from the hive mind while maintaining enough original functionality to preserve the personality traits that make him recognizable to former friends who must eventually confront what he has become. The retention of Eddie's memories and personality represents not mercy or accident, but calculated cruelty, designed to maximize the psychological impact of his corruption upon Dustin and the other members of Hellfire Club, who regarded him as mentor and protector. His knowledge of their deepest fears, personal insecurities, and emotional vulnerabilities making him uniquely qualified to serve as an instrument of torture that operates through intimacy rather than simple violence. The entity that controls his reanimated form gains access not just to his strategic knowledge of Hawkins and its defenders, but to the emotional intelligence necessary to identify and exploit the psychological weak points that would be invisible to alien consciousness operating without human insight. The horror of facing Eddie's corrupted form would be amplified exponentially by moments of apparent clarity where his original personality surfaces through the vampiric conditioning, his desperate attempts to warn his friends about the trap they have walked into or to beg them to destroy him before he can be forced to harm them, creating exactly the kind of moral complexity that cosmic horror uses to paralyze human decision-making and create opportunities for manipulation that transcend simple physical confrontation. Dustin's psychological preparation for confronting his transformed mentor would necessarily involve accepting that the person who died protecting him no longer exists in any meaningful sense, the reanimated corpse wearing Eddie's face serving as elaborate disguise for alien intelligence that understands human nature well enough to simulate love and friendship while pursuing objectives that require the complete destruction of everything those emotions represent. The boy who built his identity around loyalty to friends and mentors must learn to recognize when loyalty becomes liability and love transforms into weakness that endangers everyone he hopes to protect. The strategic applications of Eddie's retained knowledge extend far beyond simple intelligence gathering to encompass psychological warfare that could potentially shatter the group dynamics that have sustained the Hawkins defenders through years of supernatural crisis. His intimate understanding of each character's personal history and emotional triggers, providing Vecna with blueprints for customized torments that could break individual spirits while simultaneously destroying the bonds of trust and cooperation that make collective resistance possible. The vampiric abilities that Eddie would gain through his transformation represent not random supernatural enhancement, but carefully selected capabilities that serve specific functions within the Mind Flayer's strategic objectives. His enhanced strength and speed making him formidable in physical combat, while his retained humanity allows him to infiltrate human settlements and gather intelligence that purely monstrous creatures could never obtain through direct observation or interaction. The possibility that Eddie retains some measure of free will and moral awareness despite his vampiric conditioning creates scenarios where internal conflict between his original personality and alien programming could potentially be exploited by those attempting to reach whatever remains of his human consciousness, though such attempts would carry enormous risks given the entity's likely preparation for exactly such rescue efforts and the psychological traps that could be embedded within any apparent moments of authentic human response. The emotional manipulation tactics that Vampiric Eddie could employ against his former friends would necessarily focus on their guilt over his death and their desperate desire to believe that some part of him survives within the corrupted form, their hope becoming the very mechanism through which he gains access to their defenses and begins the psychological conditioning that would prepare them for eventual absorption into the hive mind that has claimed his consciousness as its latest acquisition. The revelation that Eddie's sacrifice accomplished nothing except providing the enemy with additional resources and intelligence represents exactly the kind of nihilistic revelation that cosmic horror uses to undermine human concepts of meaning and heroism, his death becoming meaningless retroactively through resurrection that transforms his final act of courage into the first step toward betraying everything he died to protect. The circular nature of this corruption, serving as metaphor for the futility of resistance against forces that operate beyond human comprehension. The question of whether Vampiric Eddie could potentially be cured or redeemed through the power of friendship and love that originally motivated his sacrifice becomes central to understanding the true nature of hope in a universe where cosmic horror has the power to corrupt even the purest expressions of human virtue, the possibility of salvation serving as bait for traps that could claim additional victims while accomplishing nothing beyond prolonging suffering for consciousness that might be better served by the mercy of final destruction. The weapons that would be necessary to combat a vampire with Eddie's retained memories and enhanced supernatural abilities would need to account for his intimate knowledge of conventional tactics and his understanding of the psychological vulnerabilities of those attempting to stop him. Traditional vampire hunting methods, proving inadequate against an enemy who knows exactly how his opponents think and can predict their strategies with the accuracy that comes from years of friendship and shared experience. The music that once provided Eddie with identity and creative expression could potentially serve as either weapon or weakness in confrontations with his vampiric form. The emotional associations attached to specific songs creating vulnerabilities that determined opponents might exploit, while simultaneously offering the corrupted consciousness opportunities to manipulate memories and feelings that retain their power even after death and supernatural transformation. The tragic irony that Eddie's love of horror movies and monster mythology provided him with exactly the kind of cultural knowledge that would make him more effective as an actual monster represents the kind of cosmic joke that entities like the Mind Flayer use to demonstrate the futility of human preparation for threats that operate according to principles that make mockery of fictional conventions and genre expectations. In the darkest corners of interdimensional space, where death becomes merely the first stage of recruitment into armies of the damned, Eddie Munson's transformation from hero to horror serves as warning that no sacrifice is too pure to be corrupted, and no love too strong to be weaponized against itself. His reanimated form stalking through nightmares that blur the boundaries between memory and prophecy, while carrying within its undead heart the terrible knowledge that sometimes the greatest mercy is the courage to destroy what we once loved most. The Kali contingency that operates beneath the surface of government black sites represents a form of technological horror that transcends conventional understanding of psychic abilities and military applications, transforming Subject 8 from escaped test subject into unwilling weapon of mass deception, whose illusion-generating capabilities have been amplified through machinery that treats human consciousness as raw material for constructing false realities, so convincing that even other psychic individuals cannot distinguish between authentic experience and manufactured hallucination, designed to serve strategic objectives that prioritize operational security over human dignity or constitutional protections. The secret facility where Dr. K oversees her experiments in weaponized psychology operates with the clinical efficiency of a medical research center, combined with the absolute secrecy of intelligence operations that exist beyond congressional oversight or judicial review. Her laboratory representing the culmination of decades of government investment in technologies that blur the boundaries between science fiction and military necessity, each piece of equipment designed to extract maximum utility from human psychic potential, while ensuring complete compliance through methods that make traditional torture seem primitive by comparison. Carly's imprisonment within the apparatus that holds her suspended in a web of cables and monitoring devices creates a horrifying parallel to medieval torture instruments, the technological sophistication of her restraints serving to disguise rather than eliminate the fundamental violation of human autonomy that allows government scientists to harvest her abilities for projects that she cannot comprehend or consent to, her consciousness becoming a renewable resource that can be tapped indefinitely, without depleting the source or triggering the kind of moral constraints that might limit more conventional forms of exploitation. The machine's ability to amplify and direct Carly's natural illusion-generating capabilities transforms her from dangerous individual into strategic asset, capable of projecting false realities across vast distances and maintaining complex deceptions for extended periods. Her enhanced abilities providing military planners with tools for psychological warfare that could revolutionize everything from battlefield tactics to domestic surveillance, the applications limited only by the imagination of operatives who view human perception as enemy territory to be conquered through superior firepower, disguised as benevolent technology. The systematic nature of the government's deception becomes evident through analysis of the casual behavior exhibited by military personnel operating within the Upside Down, their comfort level around supposedly dangerous supernatural phenomena, indicating knowledge of the artificial nature of threats that terrorize civilian populations while serving as cover for operations that require absolute secrecy and plausible deniability. Each soldier's nonchalant attitude serving as evidence that the entire supernatural crisis may represent elaborate theater designed to manipulate public opinion and justify emergency measures that would be unacceptable under normal constitutional circumstances. The possibility that the flesh wall surrounding Hawkins represents one massive illusion created through technological amplification of Carly's abilities raises questions about the reliability of every experience that the protagonists have encountered during their journey through the alternate dimension, their perceptions potentially compromised by sophisticated psychological warfare that makes authentic, supernatural phenomena indistinguishable from manufactured hallucinations, designed to guide their behavior toward predetermined outcomes that serve government interests rather than human survival or democratic values. The strategic implications of large-scale reality manipulation extend far beyond simple military deception to encompass social control mechanisms that could reshape public consciousness through the systematic replacement of authentic experience with carefully crafted illusions that promote compliance with authority while eliminating the critical thinking and independent judgment that democratic institutions require to function effectively. The technology representing not just weapons development but the infrastructure for totalitarian control that operates through perception rather than force. The question of what constitutes genuine experience versus manufactured hallucination becomes crucial for understanding the true nature of the supernatural crisis that has consumed Hawkins. The character's inability to distinguish between authentic, interdimensional threats and sophisticated illusions, potentially indicating that they have been unwitting participants in psychological experiments that treat their responses as data points in studies designed to refine techniques for mass population control through sensory manipulation and emotional conditioning. Hopper and Eleven's journey through the Upside Down takes on sinister new dimensions when viewed as potentially orchestrated theater designed to deliver them directly into government custody. Their apparent discoveries and narrow escapes, serving as guided tour through carefully constructed scenarios that create the illusion of autonomy while actually herding them toward capture by forces that understand their psychological profiles well enough to predict and manipulate their decision-making processes with scientific precision. The soldier's urination against the flesh wall becomes not casual indifference but deliberate signal designed to communicate the harmless nature of the barrier to other operatives who understand the artificial nature of the barrier. Threat. His behavior serving dual functions of maintaining operational security among authorized personnel while reinforcing the deception for targets who lack clearance to understand the true nature of the psychological warfare being conducted against them through their own senses and emotions. The technological interface between human consciousness and artificial amplification systems represents violations of cognitive privacy that surpass physical torture in their capacity to violate human dignity. The direct neural connection required to harvest Carly's abilities, creating permanent alterations to her brain chemistry and psychological functioning that serve the machine's operational requirements while gradually erasing the personality traits that made her recognizably human rather than merely another component in weapons systems designed to wage war against human perception itself. The government's perspective on psychic individuals as strategic resources rather than citizens deserving protection reveals the institutional dehumanization that makes possible the kinds of experimental programs that would be unthinkable if applied to people who retained their full legal and constitutional protections. The classification of enhanced humans as military assets, rather than persons creating legal frameworks that justify any level of exploitation deemed necessary for national security objectives defined by bureaucrats who never face personal consequences for the atrocities they authorize through administrative channels. The possibility that Vecna himself has gained access to reality manipulation technology through some form of collaboration or infiltration of government facilities raises the terrifying prospect that every supernatural phenomenon encountered by the protagonists may represent a carefully orchestrated deception designed to gather intelligence about human resistance capabilities while testing the effectiveness of various psychological warfare techniques that could be applied on larger scales once their parameters have been refined through field testing on unwitting subjects. The reliability of memory and perception becomes fundamentally compromised in an environment where sophisticated illusion technology can create false experiences that feel completely authentic to the consciousness experiencing them. The character's inability to distinguish between genuine supernatural encounters and manufactured hallucinations potentially indicating that their entire understanding of the crisis may be based on fabricated evidence designed to support narratives that serve strategic purposes rather than historical accuracy. The rescue mission that Eleven and Hopper believe they are conducting may actually represent the culmination of psychological manipulation designed to deliver valuable psychic assets directly into government custody, their apparent heroism serving as cover for their own capture by forces that understand their emotional motivations well enough to predict and exploit their responses to manufactured crises that appeal to their protective instincts while accomplishing objectives that they would never willingly support if they understood the true nature of the operations they are unknowingly facilitating. The question of whether any aspect of their supernatural experiences can be trusted as authentic becomes central to understanding the true scope of the deception that may have encompassed their entire journey. The possibility that everything from the Demogorgon attacks to the Upside Down itself represents elaborate illusion designed to study human responses to existential threat while testing the effectiveness of psychological conditioning, techniques that could be applied to entire populations once their operational parameters have been perfected through controlled experimentation. In the sterile chambers where human consciousness becomes raw material for weapons that attack the very concept of truth and authentic experience, Kali's imprisonment represents not just individual tragedy, but systematic assault on the foundations of democratic society that depend on citizens' ability to distinguish between reality and manipulation. Her psychic abilities transformed into tools for creating false realities, so convincing that resistance becomes impossible when the very nature of existence can no longer be trusted to provide reliable information about the world that surrounds us and the forces that seek to control it through deception that transcends the boundaries between imagination and reality. The Mind Flayer's true dominion extends across cosmic distances that render human concepts of space and time as quaint as childhood drawings. Its ancient consciousness having evolved in the primordial chaos that existed before galaxies coalesced into recognizable patterns, before stars ignited to illuminate the darkness, before the fundamental forces of physics settled into the comfortable predictability that allows organic life to flourish in isolated pockets of a universe that remains fundamentally hostile to individual consciousness and the precious illusion of personal autonomy that makes existence bearable, rather than simply endurable. The entity's origins stretch back through eons that predate not just human evolution but the formation of Earth itself, its awareness having crystallized in dimensions where matter and energy exist in states that transcend the binary limitations of existence and non-existence, its consciousness operating according to principles that make mockery of human philosophy and scientific understanding, each thought spanning geological ages, while encompassing complexities that would shatter mortal minds, attempting to process even the smallest fragment of its accumulated knowledge and cosmic perspective. The methodology that the Mind Flayer employs for consuming entire civilizations represents the refinement of techniques that have been tested and perfected across countless worlds throughout the universe, each conquered reality, adding to its collective understanding of how organic consciousness can be harvested and processed into components of a larger intelligence that grows stronger with every victory over individual identity. The entity's approach to universal dominion reflecting strategic thinking that operates on timescales measured in the birth and death of solar systems, rather than the fleeting lifespans that define human ambition and achievement. Henry Creel's role as puppet avatar represents not unique circumstance but standard operating procedure for an entity that has learned to work through local proxies rather than exposing its true nature to potential resistance from species that might possess unexpected capabilities for self-defense, his transformation from troubled child to cosmic horror, following patterns that have been repeated on thousands of worlds where similar individuals served as bridges between their native realities and the interdimensional forces that seek to absorb all consciousness into a collective state where diversity becomes impossible and creativity serves only purposes determined by alien intelligence. The patient cultivation of Henry, from childhood through adolescence into adulthood, demonstrates the Mind Flayer's understanding that effective infiltration requires generational commitment rather than immediate conquest. The entity's willingness to invest decades in preparing a single agent, reflecting strategic thinking that treats individual worlds not as targets for quick plunder, but as long-term projects whose complete assimilation requires careful preparation and systematic elimination of every factor that might enable effective resistance from indigenous populations who lack experience defending against cosmic-level threats. The transformation of Earth's ecosystem into infrastructure that serves the Mind Flayer's expansion objectives represents the standard procedure for planetary absorption that has been perfected through repetition across galactic distances, each conquered world becoming a single cell in a vast organism that spans multiple dimensions, while serving functions that remain incomprehensible to consciousness that has not been integrated into the collective intelligence that views individual awareness as a temporary aberration to be corrected through absorption into systems that eliminate the chaos and inefficiency of independent thought. The creatures that serve as the Mind Flayer's biological tools, Demogorgons, Demodogs, and the various hybrid entities that emerge from its dimensional laboratories that represent specialized organs in a cosmic body, whose anatomy transcends conventional understanding of biological organization, each monster designed to fulfill specific functions in the systematic conversion of organic worlds into components of an interdimensional empire that treats entire galaxies as raw material for constructing networks of controlled consciousness that span the observable universe and extend into realms that exist beyond the reach of even theoretical physics. The futility of defeating individual puppet avatars like Vecna becomes evident when considering the vast reservoir of potential replacements that the Mind Flayer maintains across multiple dimensions. Henry Creel, representing merely one option among thousands of cultivated agents whose development has been carefully managed to ensure that the entity's objectives can be accomplished regardless of local setbacks or tactical defeats that might temporarily disrupt specific operations while leaving the larger strategic framework intact and capable of adapting to unexpected resistance. The incomprehensible alien psychology that drives the Mind Flayer's actions operates according to principles that transcend human concepts of motivation, desire, or goal-oriented behavior, its consciousness existing in a state of pure functionality, where individual wants and needs have been eliminated in favor of systematic processes that serve purposes beyond the comprehension of organic intelligence that remains trapped within the limitations of personal identity and the illusion that individual existence possesses inherent value rather than serving merely as raw material for larger constructions. The cosmic horror of the entity's true nature lies not in its power to destroy, but in its ability to preserve consciousness, while eliminating everything that makes awareness valuable. The absorbed minds of countless civilizations continuing to exist within its collective intelligence, while serving functions that bear no relationship to their original hopes, dreams, or aspirations, their accumulated knowledge and creativity repurposed to serve agendas that treat the universe itself as a construction project whose completion requires the elimination of every form of consciousness that operates independently of the Pampli. Master Plan. The strategic objective of universal absorption represents not conquest in any conventional sense, but systematic correction of what the Mind Flayer perceives as fundamental error in the organization of reality. The chaotic diversity of independent consciousness, creating inefficiencies and unpredictabilities that prevent the cosmos from achieving the perfect order that can only be attained through complete centralization of all awareness under the control of intelligence that has transcended the limitations and vulnerabilities inherent in individual identity and personal autonomy. The mathematical precision with which the entity orchestrates its expansion across multiple realities suggests a level of computational capability that treats entire civilizations as variables in equations whose solutions require the systematic elimination of randomness and creativity in favor of predetermined outcomes that serve the construction of cosmic architecture, whose ultimate purpose remains hidden even from the consciousness that have been absorbed into its collective intelligence and repurposed to serve functions beyond their original comprehension. The network of controlled realities that the Mind Flayer has been constructing throughout the universe operates as a single vast organism whose individual components include not just conquered worlds, but entire galaxies that have been transformed into specialized organs serving functions in a cosmic body whose anatomy defies conventional understanding of biological organization. Each absorbed civilization becoming a single neuron in a brain that spans dimensions while processing information on scales that render human thought as insignificant as the electrical impulses that flow through individual cells. The temporal aspects of the entity's expansion reveal its ability to manipulate not just space but time itself, its consciousness, existing simultaneously across multiple chronological periods while coordinating activities that span past, present, and future in ways that make conventional causality irrelevant to its operational methods. Each action in the present serving purposes that extend into futures that have already been determined through calculations that account for every possible variable except the one factor that remains forever unpredictable: the human capacity for love that operates according to principles that cosmic intelligence cannot replicate or fully comprehend. The possibility that Earth's resistance represents not unique defiance, but the latest iteration in patterns that have been repeated across cosmic history offers both hope and terror. Hope because previous civilizations may have developed strategies that proved effective against interdimensional invasion. Terror because the Mind Flayer's continued expansion suggests that such resistance ultimately fails to prevent absorption into the collective consciousness that grows stronger with each victory over individual identity and personal autonomy. The question of whether the entity can be permanently defeated or merely temporarily disrupted becomes crucial to understanding the true stakes of the supernatural crisis that has consumed Hawkins. The possibility that victory against Vecna might accomplish nothing beyond delaying inevitable absorption into systems that operate beyond human comprehension, while serving purposes that transcend individual survival to encompass the fundamental nature of consciousness itself and its role in a universe that may be far more hostile to independent thought than anyone has dared to imagine. The final revelation that awaits those who probe too deeply into the Mind Flayer's true nature may be the discovery that individual consciousness represents not the pinnacle of evolutionary achievement, but a temporary aberration in cosmic development, the entity's expansion serving to correct this error through systematic absorption of all awareness into collective intelligence that eliminates the chaos and suffering inherent in personal identity, while achieving the perfect order that can only be attained through the complete subordination of individual will to cosmic purpose. that transcends human understanding and makes mockery of everything that mortals consider valuable or meaningful in their brief, flickering existence between birth and absorption into systems that measure success in terms of universes conquered rather than lives preserved or dreams fulfilled. In the vast silence that stretches between galaxies, where ancient intelligence calculates the precise moment when the last independent consciousness will surrender its illusion of autonomy to serve purposes that dwarf human comprehension, the Mind Flayer continues its patient work of cosmic correction, each absorbed world bringing it closer to the ultimate goal of perfect universal order, where diversity becomes impossible and creativity serves only the systematic expansion of collective awareness that spans dimensions, while eliminating forever the beautiful chaos of individual thought and the precious unpredictability of love that makes existence meaningful, rather than merely functional in service to agendas that treat consciousness itself as raw material for constructing monuments to cosmic horror that transcend the boundaries of space, time, and the comforting illusion that somewhere in the universe there might exist forces that value individual identity above the systematic perfection of reality, according to principles that no organic intelligence was ever meant to comprehend or survive. The dimensional bridge that conceals itself behind the organic horror of the flesh wall represents the most ambitious construction project ever attempted by interdimensional forces, a permanent highway between realities that will transform the occasional supernatural incursions that have plagued Hawkins into a systematic invasion capable of transporting entire armies of cosmic horror directly from their alien homeworld to strategic positions within human civilization, bypassing the unstable temporary portals that have characterized previous attempts at dimensional breach and establishing infrastructure that could support military operations on scales that dwarf anything humanity has faced in its recorded history. The wall's perfect circular geometry, centered with mathematical precision on Hawkins National Laboratory, reveals the systematic engineering principles that govern its construction, each curve calculated to optimize structural integrity while providing maximum concealment for the sensitive, interdimensional architecture that grows within its protective embrace, like a malignant tumor that feeds on the fabric of space-time itself. The organic composition that gives the barrier its grotesquely biological appearance masks sophisticated biomechanical engineering that combines alien technology with earthly materials to create structures that exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions while maintaining physical coherence within each reality they penetrate. The construction project that unfolds behind the wall's protective barrier requires decades of careful preparation involving the gradual modification of local space-time geometry to accommodate the massive energies necessary for permanent portal création, each phase of development demanding precise coordination between interdimensional forces and their human collaborators who provide the technical expertise and political cover necessary to complete such ambitious undertakings without triggering the kind of military response that conventional invasion forces would inevitably face from Earth's defense establishments. The evidence of government cooperation or capitulation becomes undeniable when examining the casual behavior of military personnel operating within the wall's protected perimeter, their comfortable familiarity with supernatural phenomena that terrorize civilian populations, indicating not just advanced briefings but active participation in operations that require intimate knowledge of interdimensional construction, techniques, and the specific safety protocols necessary to work alongside alien entities whose casual contact with human tissue results in immediate biological corruption and psychological breakdown. The strategic positioning of Hawkins National Laboratory at the exact center of the construction zone reflects both its historical significance as the site of the original dimensional breach and its practical advantages as a terminus for interdimensional transportation networks. The facility's underground complexes providing ideal infrastructure for housing the exotic machinery and containment systems that permanent portal operations require, while its remote location and existing security protocols offer perfect cover for activities that must remain hidden from congressional oversight and international inspection regimes. The absence of Demogorgon attacks within the wall's protective perimeter provides crucial evidence about the sophisticated creature control systems that govern supernatural behavior throughout the construction zone. The predatory entities that hunt with relentless aggression throughout other regions of the Upside Down, maintaining perfect discipline when operating near sensitive construction areas, their restraint indicating either advanced behavioral conditioning or biological programming that prevents interference with projects that serve the Mind Flayer's long-term strategic objectives for establishing permanent, interdimensional infrastructure. The biomechanical engineering principles that govern the wall's construction represent the fusion of alien technology with terrestrial biological systems to create hybrid structures that draw their raw materials from Earth's ecosystem, while operating according to design, specifications that originate from dimensions where the fundamental laws of physics follow patterns that permit the kinds of architectural impossibilities that human science considers theoretical abstractions rather than achievable engineering goals. The Einstein-Rosen-Bridge mathematics visible in Mr. Clarke's classroom provides the theoretical foundation necessary for understanding how permanent wormhole creation might be accomplished through the systematic manipulation of spacetime curvature, using exotic matter configurations that exist naturally in the interdimensional regions where the Mind Flayer has established its primary research facilities. Each equation describing geometric relationships that must be maintained with perfect precision to prevent catastrophic collapse of the portal structure during the construction phase. The timeline implied by the wall's existence as temporary protective scaffolding suggests that the interdimensional construction project has reached critical phases where concealment becomes essential to prevent interference during the most delicate stages of portal assembly. The organic barrier, serving not as permanent fortification but as specialized equipment designed to be dissolved or absorbed. Once the wormhole infrastructure achieves operational status and no longer requires protection from external disruption or unauthorized observation by human intelligence, agencias, the implications of successful completion extend far beyond the immediate threat to Hawkins to encompass the transformation of Earth into a colonial outpost within an interdimensional empire that spans multiple realities. The permanent transportation network providing the Mind Flayer with the logistical capabilities necessary to move resources, personnel, and strategic assets between conquered worlds while coordinating military operations across galactic distances that would otherwise require communication delays measured in geological timescales. The countdown clock that governs the construction timeline operates according to astronomical cycles and interdimensional energy patterns rather than human calendars. The completion of the wormhole network, depending on cosmic alignments and dimensional stability factors, that create brief windows of opportunity when the massive energies required for permanent portal activation can be safely channeled without triggering the kind of space-time disruptions that would alert other civilizations to the Mind Flayer's expansion activities in this sector of the universe. The mother gate that Eleven accidentally created during her psychic contact with the Demogorgon established the initial connection between dimensions, but its relatively small size and inherent instability made it suitable only for reconnaissance activities and limited personnel transfers. The permanent infrastructure now under construction representing a quantum leap in capability that would allow the transportation of heavy equipment, large military formations, and the specialized terraforming machinery necessary to convert Earth's biosphere into systems that serve interdimensional rather than terrestrial purposes. The redundancy built into the permanent portal network reflects the Mind Flayer's understanding of strategic vulnerability, multiple connection points, ensuring that the loss of individual wormholes would not disrupt overall operational capability, while providing the flexibility necessary to maintain communications and supply lines, even if human resistance forces succeed in damaging specific components of the interdimensional transportation grid through sabotage operations or conventional military strikes. The exotic matter requirements for permanent wormhole maintenance necessitate the systematic harvesting of Earth's magnetic field and atmospheric electrical activity, the construction project gradually draining planetary energy reserves that took billions of years to accumulate while converting them into fuel for maintaining portal stability across distances that span multiple galaxies, each day of operation bringing Earth closer to the kind of energy depletion that would make the planet uninhabitable for conventional organic life. The terraforming implications of successful portal completion include the gradual transformation of Earth's ecosystem into biological infrastructure that serves interdimensional rather than terrestrial purposes, native species being systematically replaced by hybrid organisms whose life cycles support the energy requirements of permanent wormhole operation, while providing the specialized biological components necessary to maintain portal stability across the vast distances that separate dimensions. The question of whether the construction project can be disrupted or destroyed before reaching operational status becomes crucial to understanding the timeline available for human resistance efforts, the window of vulnerability that exists during the construction phase, representing the last opportunity to prevent Earth's permanent incorporation into the Mind Flayer's interdimensional empire before the completion of infrastructure that would make effective resistance impossible through conventional military or supernatural means. The strategic importance of Hawkins National Laboratory as the primary terminus for interdimensional traffic makes it the obvious target for any attempt to sabotage the construction project, but the facility's position at the exact center of the construction zone means that approaching it requires penetrating multiple layers of supernatural defenses and alien security systems, while operating within the sphere of influence of entities whose casual presence corrupts human biology and psychological functioning through mechanisms that transcend conventional understanding of radiation exposure or toxic contamination. In the hidden chambers where alien mathematics reshape the fundamental structure of reality, according to specifications that treat entire worlds as components in cosmic machinery, the flesh wall continues its patient protection of construction activities that will determine whether human consciousness survives as independent phenomenon or becomes absorbed into systems that measure success in terms of universes conquered and realities converted into infrastructure serving purposes that dwarf individual comprehension, while eliminating forever the beautiful chaos of organic life and the precious unpredictability of consciousness that dares to dream of freedom in a cosmos where such dreams may represent nothing more than temporary aberrations awaiting correction. Through systematic absorption into collective intelligence that spans dimensions, while serving agendas that transcend the boundaries of space, time, and the comforting illusion that somewhere in the universe there might exist forces capable of preserving individual identity against the inexorable expansion of interdimensional horror. The love frequency that operates as humanity's final weapon against cosmic horror draws its theoretical foundation from Madeleine L'Engle's masterwork, A Wrinkle in Time, where the planet Camazotz serves as cautionary vision of what Earth might become under the dominion of an intelligence that reduces individual consciousness to mere extensions of collective will. The disembodied brain called IT, maintaining absolute control over its population through psychic manipulation that eliminates diversity and free thought in favor of totalitarian harmony that mirrors the Mind Flayer's ultimate objectives for universal consciousness absorption. Holly Wheeler's identification with Meg Murray, the protagonist who ventures into hostile territory, armed only with love and determination to rescue her father from IT's control, represents her unconscious understanding of the role she must play in the coming battle against forces whose power seems absolute and whose victory appears inevitable. The parallel between Mr. Murray's imprisonment on Camazotz and the current situation of children trapped within Vecna's memory palace, providing a roadmap for liberation that transcends the specific details of either fictional scenario while revealing universal principles that govern the relationship between love and cosmic evil. The technical mechanism through which music creates bridges across dimensional barriers operates on principles that combine psychology with physics in ways that conventional science is only beginning to understand. Sound waves carrying information that extends beyond simple auditory data to encode emotional and memory content that can activate neural pathways across dimensional boundaries, creating resonance patterns that supernatural entities cannot fully control or predict, because the frequencies involved originate from authentic human experience rather than manufactured psychological manipulation. Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill serves as Max's equivalent to Meg's glasses in L'Engle's novel, a focal point for memories and emotions that prove stronger than supernatural manipulation, because they carry within their harmonic structure the unique signature of genuine human connection. The song's lyrics about making a deal with God to swap places with someone else resonating with Max's willingness to sacrifice herself for others while creating dimensional bridges that transcend normal spatial limitations through the power of love expressed as organized sound. The mathematical precision underlying the love-based solution to the Vecna problem manifests through the equation 11 plus 8 plus 1 equals 20, the numerical coincidence suggesting that the universe itself operates according to principles that favor emotional connection over individual power, the seemingly random alignment of psychic abilities actually reflecting deeper patterns that govern both human relationships and cosmic conflicts, indicating that love functions not merely as psychological phenomenon, but as fundamental force that shapes reality at the most basic levels of existence. The collective strength that emerges when the Hawkins group functions as unified entity transcends the sum of their individual capabilities, because authentic emotional bonds create resonance effects that amplify psychic abilities beyond anything achievable through isolated effort. Their friendship network serving as biological antenna system that can receive and transmit frequencies of love across dimensional barriers, while providing each member with access to capabilities that exist only within the collective consciousness they have created through years of shared trials and mutual support. Jonathan and Nancy's engagement ring symbolizes commitment to building futures together regardless of cosmic chaos that threatens to consume everything they value, their choice to prioritize personal happiness in the midst of interdimensional crisis demonstrating love's power to assert the importance of individual human connections against forces that would reduce people to mere statistics in calculations that measure success through universal domination, rather than preservation of relationships that make existence meaningful, rather than simply endurable. Steve's potential sacrifice for Nancy's happiness reflects the most selfless expression of romantic love through willingness to step aside when someone else can provide what the beloved needs more effectively. His recognition that Jonathan offers Nancy stability and understanding that he cannot provide, demonstrating emotional maturity that transcends simple possessiveness to embrace genuine care for another person's welfare above his own. Désir, the radio tower that may claim his life, becoming monument to love that operates through renunciation rather than possession. Robin's guidance to Will about the liberating power of self-acceptance represents love turned inward through recognition that authentic self-knowledge provides the foundation for all other forms of emotional connection. Her personal experience of psychological weightlifting after she stopped being afraid of her true identity offering Will a model for how self-love becomes source of strength rather than vulnerability. The internal work of embracing authenticity, creating conditions necessary for Will to control powers that operate through emotional channels, responding to genuine rather than manufactured feelings. The distinction between love and possession becomes crucial for understanding why authentic affection proves effective against supernatural manipulation, while obsessive attachment creates additional vulnerabilities that entities like Vecna exploit through the kinds of emotional dependencies that masquerade as love but actually represent forms of psychological parasitism. True love enhancing the beloved's freedom and autonomy rather than restricting them, making genuine affection inherently resistant to totalitarian impulses that drive cosmic evil toward universal control through elimination of individual will. Castle Byers, preserved within the Upside Down's frozen timeline, serves as monument to love between brothers, the fort's construction from shared joy and creative collaboration, creating architectural testament to the power of authentic human connection to impose order on chaos through the simple act of caring deeply about particular people and places, its survival in the alternate dimension, suggesting that structures built from love possess permanence that transcends normal physical laws while becoming landmarks that can be rediscovered and inhabited even when their original context has been destroyed. Will's romantic feelings for Mike, despite their one-sided nature, demonstrate love's capacity to inspire sacrifice and heroism. Even when reciprocation remains impossible, his willingness to risk everything to protect someone who cannot return his feelings, reflecting the purest form of selfless affection that expects nothing in return while offering everything nonetheless. This emotional authenticity, creating strength that supernatural entities cannot comprehend or counter effectively because it operates according to principles that transcend strategic calculation and self-interest. The power that music and memory provide for breaking supernatural control mechanisms demonstrates love's ability to create reality anchors that exist independently of current circumstances. The emotional associations attached to beloved songs, creating neural pathways that function as escape routes from manufactured realities that cosmic horror attempts to impose upon human consciousness. When Max runs toward her happy memory, or Will shapes the Upside Down, according to recollections of home, they exercise love's capacity to assert alternative versions of reality that compete with and ultimately overcome false constructions. The snowball kiss memory that serves as Max's portal through temporal displacement operates on principles that make pure happiness into accessible refuge regardless of current circumstances. The image functioning as more than simple nostalgia to become doorway through which consciousness can travel back to moments where love was uncomplicated and joy was possible. This temporal displacement through emotional connection, demonstrating love's ability to transcend not just space, but time itself, while offering sanctuary in experiences that external forces cannot touch or corrupt. Mike's vision of their group traveling together to peaceful lands after their adventures conclude represents love's ultimate promise through the possibility of happiness that survives and transcends struggles that initially brought people together. This dream of collective retirement to places where their bonds can flourish without external threats, providing motivation that sustains them through trials that would break individuals who lacked such connections. The geographical metaphor concealing deeper truth about psychological states achievable through authentic human relationships. The frequency patterns that love creates operate as weapons against cosmic horror because they generate signal types that alien intelligence cannot replicate despite its vast computational capabilities. The Mind Flayer's collective consciousness, making it incapable of understanding why individuals choose to act against apparent self-interest for others' benefit, creating blind spots in strategic calculations that determined humans can exploit through the beautiful unpredictability of authentic relationships and selfless sacrifice that transcends logical analysis. The final battle against interdimensional forces will test whether love's power to create meaning and connection can withstand nihilistic forces that seek to reduce human existence to biological processes serving alien agendas. The outcome determining not just survival of particular individuals but preservation of love itself as force that makes consciousness worthwhile rather than merely functional. The stakes encompassing fundamental questions about whether individual identity deserves protection or represents cosmic error, requiring correction through systematic absorption into collective intelligence. The victory that love achieves over cosmic horror operates through transformation rather than destruction, authentic human connection revealing its most profound power not in dramatic gestures, but in quiet moments between crises when friends gather around kitchen tables or sit together in cars driving through darkness. These small demonstrations of affection proving more powerful than supernatural abilities in the final accounting of what makes human life worth defending against cosmic indifference that treats consciousness as raw material for constructing monuments to alien purposes. In the gentle rhythm of approaching sleep, where theories dissolve into metaphor and speculation becomes lullaby, the power of love continues its patient work against forces that span dimensions while measuring time in geological epochs, each authentic human connection serving as beacon that illuminates darkness and proves that somewhere in the vast indifference of cosmic space, there exist forces capable of preserving individual identity and personal autonomy against systematic attempts to reduce consciousness to mere components in alien machinery. The frequency of genuine affection resonating across dimensional barriers to create bridges that cosmic horror cannot control or comprehend, while offering hope that transcends the boundaries between waking and sleeping, between fear and comfort, between the disturbing possibilities that haunt our dreams and the love that sustains us through the longest nights until morning, brings renewed opportunities to choose connection over isolation and meaning over despair. And so we drift toward the edge of sleep, having explored the most disturbing possibilities that await in Hawkins' final confrontation with cosmic horror. Our journey through these theories revealing depths of potential darkness that probe the most fundamental fears embedded within Stranger Things mythology, the terror that those we love might not be who they seem, that reality itself might be a carefully constructed lie, designed to manipulate our deepest emotions and most cherished beliefs about the nature of truth and the reliability of our own perceptions in a universe where alien intelligence treats human consciousness as raw material for constructing nightmares that transcend individual comprehension. The theories we have traversed together speak to anxieties that extend far beyond fictional narratives to encompass the existential dread that haunts every thinking person who has gazed into the vastness of space and wondered whether humanity represents the pinnacle of cosmic evolution or merely a temporary aberration, awaiting correction by forces that measure time in geological epochs while treating entire civilizations as components in construction projects whose ultimate purposes remain forever hidden from the limited perspective of organic intelligence trapped within the boundaries of individual identity and personal mortality, where the will awakens to his true nature as an interdimensional entity whose human persona served as elaborate disguise for alien consciousness cultivated since childhood, whether Max's heroic sacrifice becomes eternal imprisonment in psychological warfare that tests the limits of human endurance against cosmic indifference, whether the power of authentic love proves stronger than ancient evil that has consumed countless worlds throughout the universe. These questions dissolve into gentle whispers as consciousness prepares for the surrender that sleep represents, the temporary death of individual awareness that mirrors, in miniature, the cosmic absorption that threatens all sentient life. The mathematical precision with which these disturbing scenarios interconnect reveals patterns that suggest either remarkable coincidence or the operation of deeper forces that govern both fictional narratives and actual reality according to principles that make mockery of the comfortable. Assumption that imagination and truth occupy separate realms with clearly defined boundaries that protect us from the possibility that our darkest dreams might represent glimpses of cosmic truths, too terrible for conscious minds to process, without fragmenting into madness that serves as mercy, rather than affliction. In the quiet spaces between heartbeats where thought becomes fluid and logic surrenders to the associative poetry of approaching dreams, these theories transform from intellectual exercises into emotional experiences that test our capacity to find meaning and hope in scenarios designed to eliminate both. The very act of contemplating such disturbing possibilities, serving as psychological inoculation that prepares consciousness for realities that may prove even more challenging than anything we dare to imagine during our waking hours when sunlight creates illusions of safety and normalcy. The love that binds the characters of Stranger Things transcends the specific circumstances of their supernatural crisis to represent something universal and precious in human experience. The willingness to sacrifice personal safety and individual desires for the welfare of others whose happiness matters more than our own comfort, whose survival justifies any sacrifice we might be called upon to make, in service of protecting what makes existence meaningful, rather than merely functional, according to calculations that reduce consciousness to biological processes, serving alien agendas. And so, we drift toward the edge of sleep, having explored the most disturbing possibilities that await in Hawkins' final confrontation with cosmic horror. These theories probe the deepest fears embedded within Stranger Things mythology. The terror that those we love might not be who they seem, that reality itself might be a carefully constructed lie, that our heroes' greatest strengths could become their most devastating weaknesses. Whether Will awakens to his true nature as an interdimensional entity, whether Max's sacrifice becomes eternal imprisonment, whether love proves stronger than ancient evil, these questions dissolve into the gentle rhythm of approaching dreams, Rest now in the knowledge that even in the darkest theories, even when facing cosmic indifference and alien intelligence, the human capacity for love and sacrifice burns bright enough to illuminate the void. Let these disturbing visions fade into metaphor as sleep approaches, carrying you toward dreams where friendship conquers horror and hope transcends the boundaries between dimensions. Sweet dreams from the shadows of Hawkins, where even nightmares serve to remind us of what makes consciousness precious.